Hello, and welcome to Everybody Eats, a Washington Wizards podcast on the Blue Wire Network. My name is Varun Shankar. I'm the Wizards reporter for the Washington Post. I brought on Tim Bontemps from ESPN this week, and we did something a little bit different. We drafted the Wizards' young players and picks moving forward. Thought it was a good time to do so. We're 20 games into the season, about the quarter mark, and it was an opportunity to see what the Wizards have in their young core and what they could still add with some of the assets they have moving forward. It was a really interesting discussion. Before we get to that, please remember to like, rate, review, share, and subscribe to the pod, no matter where you watch or listen. Tim was fantastic. Let's get to that conversation right now. Joining me now on Everybody Eats is ESPN senior writer Tim Bontemps. Tim, how are you?
Doing well, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. Just got back from Philly. The Wizards lost, which I was going to say unsurprisingly lost, but based on how they've been playing a little bit of late, maybe it was a little less
I think it's still fair to say. Think it's fair to say, unsurprisingly, that they lost. It was a little more surprising when I saw them close out the Bucks the night before in Washington, in a low point in a season quickly full of low points for the Milwaukee Bucks.
Yeah, and for the Wizards, it was a nice moment in particular for, I think, for Bilal Coulibaly. It was a game where the Wizards veterans mostly took over on offense, although Keyshawn George
I was going to say, Varun, I think it was a good night and a good feeling for Chris Middleton more than anybody else.
Very fair. But, the defense that Bilal played, particularly obviously getting the steal and slam at the end, it is the first time I've seen him step up in that way against a bigger guy. On defense, I've seen him do it against some of the smaller guards and really harass someone like Trae Young, for example, or LaMelo Ball, but who's not a small guard, but a guard nonetheless. But seeing him go against Giannis and obviously have a strength differential, but be able to counteract that with some length and speed, I thought it was really interesting.
It's been obviously a rough start to the season again for them from the Wizards from a wins and loss standpoint, but. As you have pointed out correctly, this season is about development for them still and about trying to continue to improve these players that they have. And, to have guys, like Bilal Coulibaly, who missed the beginning of the year with injury and is working his way back and is out there against an all-time great player, getting a, game-sealing steal. Like Alex Sarr has played better. Keyshawn George has had a good year. Like there are at least things that you could start to point to and say the Wizards are starting to move in a positive direction, even if it's not nearly to the place where their fans would like it to be and certainly hope it will be in the years to come.
Yeah, so we're at the 20-game mark. The Wizards are 3-17, and I wanted to zoom out right now and take a look at where they are and rank some of their young players and future picks moving forward. So we're going to do a draft, basically. Each of us it's going to be a 4-round draft. We're each going to go through and take who we think will be the best moving forward. Tim, I'll let you start.
Well, I'm going to take the 2026 first-round pick if I'm going just straight assets across the board because while the Wizards do have some interesting young pieces, what they don't have yet is a bona fide franchise player. And this upcoming draft has a chance to deliver multiple players like that, could be several players like that. And for a team that's desperately in need of star power, getting Darren Peterson or AJ DeBanza or maybe Caleb Wilson or one of these guys to potentially be the centerpiece of this next iteration of what the Wizards hope is a contending team. That's the thing they're still lacking. And so I think if you look at what they've got coming up between the players they have on the roster and the picks they have ahead, that draft pick to me is the most likely place where that's going to come from. So I think if you're ranking their assets, I think that's the best one on the board as of right now.
Do you have a sense of, it feels like at the beginning of this college season, it seemed like three guys, Boozer, DeBanza, and Peterson, were all in the running for that number one spot, and it seemed like there was a bit of a teardropper from there. Has that changed at all early in the season from what you have an idea of?
This is going to be a really interesting draft overall because of how much talent there is at the top. I would say it was less of a three-person tier and more of a there was Darren Peterson and AJ DeBanza going back and forth for the first pick. I suspect that will probably be the discussion most of the season. And then it was Carlos Boozer. It's a Freudian slip. His father obviously is Carlos Boozer, longtime NBA player. There's Cameron Boozer, and then there's a bunch of guys after him. And I think the Cameron Boozer question all season is going to be a really fascinating one because he's probably going to be the single most productive player in college basketball this year. He's really physically developed. He knows how to play. Even if, like I saw him here at the Garden in New York against Kansas a couple of weeks ago in a game Peterson was supposed to play and had a hamstring issue. He should be back sometime pretty soon. And Boozer didn't play well in that game. It still had 18, I think 12 and 5 assists, right? Like he's going to stuff the box score every single night. But he's also very physically developed, so there's less of a ceiling to grow into from a developmental standpoint, from a body perspective. And he's also not super athletic. He plays kind of like his dad. He doesn't really get off the ground. So, he's kind of a one position power forward who could have troubles on defense and isn't incredibly athletic and might not have a ton of like upward mobility from a body standpoint. So it's going to be really interesting to see if someone decide, and like you talk to people, he's a pretty fascinating prospect because you'll have people say he's fundamentally sound, and they won't say he's going to be Tim Duncan, but they will compare him to Tim Duncan from like the way he knows how to play, and he makes the right play, and he's incredibly productive and durable and dependable. And then on the other hand, you look at it and say, well, yes, that's all true, but is he just a guy that's more physically developed than the guy he's playing against? And when he gets in the NBA and he's playing against NBA length, what's going to happen then, right? Whereas the guys after that, whether it's Caleb Wilson at UNC or Nate Amen at Tennessee or Mikhail Brown at Louisville or Chris Senack at Houston, these guys are all big-time prospects that also have a lot of growth potential from an upside standpoint, right? But as of today, they're not as good as Cameron Boozer. So that question all season, I think, is going to be a really fascinating one, and probably will be one right up until the draft, because I think, assuming AJ and Darren stay healthy, I think it's very likely they're the first two picks. And then the draft will probably start at the third pick, and whether people take a swing on a guy with a higher ceiling or take a guy in Boozer who has a pretty high ceiling already, but also has an extremely high floor, and he's going to be a very good NBA player.
Yeah, the top two. So, interestingly enough, I did not have the 2026 Wizards first-round pick as the number one on my draft board for this exercise. And I'll get to how I had number one because I'm going to pick him in a second. But the reason I didn't is because if you could guarantee that the Wizards are going to have the first or second pick in this upcoming draft, it would be the number one option, because I think Peterson and DeBanza are also, they are great players, and I think that they are also good fits for what the Wizards need as someone who can play a lot with the ball in the hands.
100%.
After that, it gets a little bit more murky. I'm not going to pretend like I've done a lot of draft research at this point in time. That's a much later conversation of the season, although with the way the Wizards are playing, I might...
It's getting late early.
Yeah, exactly. But the Wizards have, I think, the worst record in the league right now, but it's a pretty jumbled tank race right now when you look at it. There's a lot of teams that have come out the gates and kind of stumbled there, and as the Wizards know all too well, the lottery reforms have made it far from a guarantee that just because you have the worst record or the second worst record, that you're actually going to get the first or second pick. Fell to 6 last year, and those possibilities are always there. And the other thing that drops the value of the 2026 first down a little bit for me is Phoenix being the positive surprise they've been so far in the season takes away so much value from what that swap could have been if they were a guaranteed lottery team or a team that was, getting off to a really slow start. I mean, right now, they look like a team that is going to be a solid contender for the play-in, if not maybe a little bit more. That's probably a little ambitious, but the play-in at least is a reasonable goal for them at this point of the season. So for those reasons, I did not have the 26 first-round pick, but if it lands in the top two, it is a prime asset for the Wizards as they're moving forward. It is a little concerning to me that this feels like it might be the Wizards' last chance at a full-on tank season, maximize your draft pick year, and just the variance that comes with the lottery. It's easy when you take over when you're Michael Winger and Will Dawkins 3 years ago, and you say, hey, we're going to have multiple shots at the apple. And then one year you get Alex Sarr in a slightly weaker draft, and he looks very good, and we'll get to him in a second.
Yep.
Then you fall to 6, and then this year you've got a lot riding on it, because after that you might start feeling some pressure to actually, put some wins on the board. But so for all those reasons, I'm a little bit worried about how much they've got riding on this 26 first round pick.
Well, and that's that you hit the nail on the head, right? Like, am I correct? You're going to pick Sarr?
I am going to pick Sarr. Sarr is the second pick.
Yes. So the reason why I would say, I think if you polled teams in the league and said, would you rather have this pick or Sarr? Sarr has gotten a lot better, and he's a really good player, and he's an interesting player for all the reasons we'll talk about in a second. I think the reason that the vast majority, if not every team in the league, would have this pick over Sarr is because, yes, there's a chance that the pick will end up not having that upside value, and it will end up, let's say it ends up with the 8th pick or something, right? And they end up with a good prospect, but not a game changer. We've seen from Alex Sarr that he's a very good player, but not a franchise cornerstone, where that pick gives you a credible chance at getting a guy who should be a franchise cornerstone.
Even if you fall lower in the draft, this draft is that deep at the top?
Well, I mean, yes, there are that many guys in the draft that could be that guy, but it's also that the Wizards are going to be one of the 3 or 4 worst teams in the league. I feel pretty confident in that.
Yeah.
And that's going to give them as good a chance as you can get to get the number 1 or 2 pick. And if you get AJ DeBanza or Darren Peterson, you could be headed in the direction that the Wizards have spent the last few years going towards, right? Whereas if you said, like, if you just went to teams and said, you can have Alex Sarr, or even if you went to the Wizards, you said you have to have the 26th first-round pick or Alex Sarr, and you can't have both, what would you choose?
That's fair.
They would choose the pick. Now, that's not to criticize Sarr, who has gotten a lot better. I think he's gotten a lot better since October. I think if you'd asked the Wizards on November 1st, maybe even as late as then, I think they'd have said Keyshawn George is their best player. And I think the way Sarr has developed this year, I think he's taken over that spot, which is great. And his skill set as a big who can protect the rim and also show some ability to shoot it from 3 is the kind of skill set every team is looking for in a big. So he's a super valuable piece. And if you can get that first guy to go with him, and then you have George as your 3rd guy, like, then you're really starting to look at the foundation of something pretty interesting. If Sarr or George has to be your best player,
it gets much more questionable.
It gets much more questionable, and a lot of things have to happen for the Wizards to get to the place they're hoping to be. But all that being said, to me, it was only a question of whether you took Sarr or that pick, and I think Sarr second is the pretty clear way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. With that pick, I would just say, looking at like the expected value of what that pick will be, if you're in the worst spot, it's the 3.7. Second slot is 3.9. So, I mean, the new lottery reforms just totally overhauled the value of tanking. And it is interesting that the Wizards have continued down this path in an era where the strategy has become less valuable than it was even 10 years ago.
Well, and this is sort of a bigger philosophical conversation, but the problem for a team like the Wizards or the Brooklyn Nets or the Charlotte Hornets or the Utah Jazz or these other teams that are doing the same thing is, at the end of the day, if you're going to win a championship in the NBA, people want to talk about parity. That's fine. You could talk about parity. Look at the last several years and who won. The Boston Celtics had Jason Tatum. The Oklahoma City Thunder had Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. The Denver Nuggets had Nikola Jokic. The Warriors had Steph Curry. The Lakers had LeBron, right? You go down the list but the Bucks had Giannis. Now, you could say, other than LeBron, all those guys were picked 7th or later in the draft. That's fine. The point, though, is that to win in the NBA, you still have to have a guy, right? And the best way to get a guy is to get the first or second pick in the draft and draft that guy coming out of college to get Victor Wembanyama, to get Luka Doncic, to get Cooper Flagg, who I think is going to be that kind of player, obviously, who's in this past draft, to get LeBron James, to get Anthony Davis, to get Kevin Durant. Name the player. Like
Cade Cunningham, Evan Mobley, even if we want to go a little bit during that
right.
list.
Like guys come from other places. You can find, like, obviously, Jokic was drafted in the second round. Giannis,
but
was drafted
that's an element of
15th.
luck there, right?
Yes. So like, and the other thing is like the part of the Wizards strategy and the Thunder strategy, which obviously Will Dawkins and much farther back in time, Michael Winger were in Oklahoma City. The thing that people don't really think about with that, the way that the Thunder went about building this team, they got a million bites at the apple, so they could fail on a bunch of picks. Like they drafted Alexei Pokusevski, that did not go anywhere. They drafted, they've had plenty of, drafted Ousmane Dieng at 11, the pick ahead of Jalen Williams. He has not developed into anything. They drafted Nikola Topic last year with the 12th pick, or 2 years ago with the 12th pick. Obviously, he's had a really unfortunate run of health issues since then. That pick might flame out. That's 3 picks in the teens that could net them basically no value, right? But they have amassed so many picks that they can get A.J. Mitchell, they can get Cason Wallace, they can get Jalen Williams, they can get the 1 pick high in the draft and get Chet Holmgren. They can draft Josh Giddey, 6th overall. And yes, they turned him into Alex Caruso, but he's not Franz Wagner. They traded away Alperen Şengün for, to get Trey Mann, right? And another pick, or they drafted Trey Mann and Alperen Şengün back-to-back picks, and they traded Şengün away for a couple future picks. Like, Alperen Şengün would look pretty good next to Chet Holmgren right now, right? So that's a lot of guys that the Thunder could have and don't have. But if you keep, the thing about the draft is it's a very inexact science, so you've got to get as many bites at it as you can. And as part of that, you have to give yourself as many chances to be at the top of the draft as you can. And to your point, that's what's been, I think, really interesting about the way the rules have changed, is that if you're one of these teams that is trying to do this and get one of these players, for as much as people want to decry tanking, A, there's always going to be bad teams, and B, how are you supposed to build a championship level team without getting high-end talent? And basically the only way to get high-end talent is to either trade for a guy, which by that point they have a lot more say in where they're going to go, or you have to get them in the draft. So it's a real catch-22, I think, in terms of trying to figure out what is actually the best path to build a championship level team in the NBA, in today's NBA. I don't think it's easy. And I think it's very easy to decry tanking or just being bad for a while ignoring the fact that it is the best path to getting those kind of players. But on the flip side of it, look at where Brooklyn is, look at where Utah is, look at where Washington is. Like, those teams all have some interesting talent, some more than others. The Nets have less than the Wizards and the Jazz, but none of them have a guy that you look at and say that guy's going to be a franchise player for the next 10 years. And that's after a whole lot of losses. So, and again, let's say they're all going to be in the mix to move up this year, right? Only 2 of them can get the top 2 picks. So, and it just as easily could go to the Thunder and the Hawks, who are already good. Just like last year, Dylan Harper, I think, is going to be a monster, and I think VJ Edgecomb's really good, and Cooper Flagg's really good. Who does that go to? The Sixers, who have been good for a while, the Spurs, who just got Stephon Castle and Victor Wembanyama, and the Mavericks, who just traded Luka Doncic, right? And if you're Washington or Brooklyn or Utah, you're sitting there going, what are we supposed to do? We didn't trade away Luka. We'd love to have Luka. And instead, we don't have Luka and we don't get Cooper Flagg. So it's a fascinating discussion. And to your point earlier, the reason I was going to say all this in the first place was you can't just do this forever. And to your point earlier about at what point do you have to start looking at other paths? Like, yes, the Wizards will finally have control of their pick again after this year. But if they finish with the 6th pick again, like, are you really doing this for another 2 or 3 or 4 years over and
It's
over and
tough.
over again? I don't see how you could possibly do that. So, at that point, then you have to start looking at, okay, what is the path forward from
Yeah.
there? And all of that, I think all of that has been really under discussed in the changes in the CBA because there's been so much attention on the stuff at the top and the money part. But Adam Silver pushing through those draft changes a few years ago, I think has radically changed how teams can go about planning for the future. And it's already made a difficult process of building a very good team that much harder. And I genuinely don't know what the best way to do it is, and I don't think anybody does. And for teams like Washington and these other teams in that spot, it makes for, I think, some very interesting and potentially difficult conversations if things don't go their way in the spring.
Absolutely. You look at the lottery reforms, and they were made to try and discourage tanking. And while they have made tanking less effective, they haven't discouraged tanking. There's so many teams this year that are bottoming out. And with the Wizards, I think they have done a good job of trying to give themselves as many bites at the apple as possible, because you either have to get lucky with the lottery or you have to get lucky in selecting someone that has been undervalued by other teams. You
Right,
look at
getting Keyshawn George at 20.
Yeah,
Or
exactly,
in the
right?
20s, not at 20. Yes.
But or I'm even saying beyond that, like getting Shingun in the team,
Yes.
right? Or
Yes.
I think of in when we even look at teams that have tried that middle build path and gotten to create good teams despite not having tank style approaches. You have New York, and that's obviously its own mix with the Knicks and what they're able to do because of their standing as the Knicks. But getting Brunson in free agency, he was not valued as the Jalen Brunson he is now when he was in free agency, and they were able to get kind of a steal there because of that. You look at Indiana getting Halliburton. That's another place where you were able to find a player that was undervalued by their current team, and then
Yep.
someone who took a massive jump after getting them into your ecosystem. And the Wizards are going to need to get lucky somehow. You got to find luck somewhere. That's part of building a good team. And where they find it, or if they don't find it, is going to be one of the big stories over the next couple years. But let's talk about the player who the highest pick they've had so far in the Michael Winger, Will Dawkins era has been number 2 in 2024, Alex Sarr. That's who I'm going to pick at
Yep.
second overall. Sarr, like you talk about, has taken a big step from his rookie year. His rookie year was pretty rough. Defensively, there was some interesting stuff. He got a lot of blocks. You saw the kind of the stretch five capabilities, but the efficiency inside was bad. The approach inside was rough. He looked tentative going to the rim, and he just played so many minutes, and you saw the improvements pretty early on in his second season. He's an imperfect player still, but he's improved in so many ways, in all the ways that you want him to. The rim defense has gone beyond just he's blocking shots, and now you can see that he's actually altering teams' shooting percentages inside the paint. You see that his shooting inside is better. His approach inside is better. He's so much more aggressive. When he's got a smaller guy on him, he's going straight up. He's going straight to the rim. He's dunking the ball a lot more. Just very simple things that have made him more of a traditional big man in terms of his offensive game. He's shooting the three less, and he's been more effective from three. You look at, no one of the Wizards has like a positive point differential, obviously because of him getting bludgeoned night after night, but he has good on-off splits. The Wizards are better with him on the court than they are off for cleaning the glass. I am confident in him being a solid starting center for a while already, and he's still just 20 years old, so there's room to grow. And so that's where I kind of get to. I'm trying to figure out what the adjusted comparison for Alex Sarr, now that we've got like 1.25 years of him in, is. And I'm kind of settling on somewhere between Diet Evan Mobley and maybe Jaren Jackson Jr. with less foul trouble, better rebounding, and a little less oomph on offense, just because Sarr's a little skinnier.
Yeah, I think that just somewhere in that phylum of player, I think, is sort of where it lands, right? Like, I think whether it's, does he develop into Al Horford, a little bit bigger version of him, maybe? Is it Miles Turner, but maybe a better rebounder, maybe? Because Miles is not a very good rebounder. Is it Evan Mobley? Is it Jaren Jackson? Like, I think all of those guys, I think, are pretty reasonable comps in different ways. Maybe doesn't quite get to the ceiling of say a guy like Mobley or Jackson, but again, Evan Mobley is not a guy who right now it looks
Correct.
like
He's
he's
not a
going to
number one.
score. Well, he's not a number one, and he like this year. We talked about this on the Hoop Collective this week. Like this was the year when you looked at it with Max Strus out, and I know we're not talking about the Wizards for a second, but with no Darius Garland for most of the year, with no Max Strus, with no Sam Merrill out. If there was ever a year for Evan Mobley to become a 24-point-a-game scorer, it was this year, right? Can you take 18 shots a game? Can you become like a co-number one option with Donovan Mitchell? Instead, he's shooting about the same amount of shots as before. He's scoring about the same number of points. He seems like he's going to be a guy that scores 18 to 20 points a game. So, maybe there's a world where Alex Sarr is less mobile than Evan Mobley, but it's a better scorer than Evan Mobley and ends up being a similar-ish kind of player. Like, that's a really good player. It's a very valuable piece. It's a good place to start from if you can find that on-ball guy to pair with it. Right. And that's where, if the Wizards a year from now are sitting there with Darren Peterson or AJ DeBansa with Alex Sarr and George on the wing and some of the other pieces they have, and they can start to grow from there, then I think you're looking at the makings of a potentially very interesting team. So yeah, his development this year, I think, has been very encouraging. I think if you look at, I think a lot of people still only think about Alex Sarr in the 0 for 15 game at Summer League. Just going to be honest, because, the Wizards have been in Siberia in a lot of ways from an NBA perspective. Like, like the Nets, like the Jazz, like, people, the casual NBA fan is not tuning in to watch a lot of Wizards games. So I think his improvement, especially this year, and especially and even the second half of last year when he did get markedly better after a very rough first half, that's very much flown under the radar. But, and I think he's a really interesting piece to build around because, again, like every NBA team is looking for size that can shoot. Like that, if you can find that combination at any position, that's a game-changing thing. And whether it's Oklahoma City or these different teams like that, it was you want to be small, then it was you want to have shooting, and now it's you want to be big and have shooting. So the combination of those two things is very intriguing. It makes him a really interesting player. I mean, the other guy we didn't mention is he could also just be like Chet Holmgren, who's got similar numbers to him too, and is another excellent player that really drives a lot of winning. And if you have a guy like that as your second or third player, that's part of the backbone of an elite team. So the question is, can they get the first guy? And, we've talked about that enough already. We'll see if they do. But I think Sarr's development this year has been really encouraging and has him on a path to be that second or third guy that you need to have beyond that first guy.
With the Holmgren and even the Mobley comparisons, the one thing that gives me, I don't even know if it gives me pause about Sarr, but I think this is the one thing you could say as a potential demerit is those guys, you talked about it, impacted winning, impacted defense very early on in their careers. And Sarr has not done that as far as the Wizards' overall team defense.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, yes.
So Chet Holmgren walked onto a Thunder team with a ton of talent around him. Evan Mobley walked onto a Cavs team with Jared Allen next to him and with Darius Garland next to him. So he had to fill a much smaller role. I don't think it's fair to compare the impact Alex Sarr has had on the court to the impact those guys had early on. Because I think it's apples and kumquats, frankly. Like you can't... I'm not saying he would have walked on those teams and had the same impact. I think that's a fair question to ask. But those guys wouldn't have had the impact on winning that they had with their teams because they would have had to be doing a lot more than they'd had to. Whereas Evan Mobley could walk in and go be a monster on defense and get some easy shots where you get them. But, it's a far different thing playing next to Jared Allen with that kind of team than playing on a Wizards team that's in the throes of a rebuild and is, you're playing with a bunch of very young guys and trying to figure it out.
Yeah, that's where I went to, but I wanted someone who wasn't in the DC perspective to echo it.
Yes.
All right, who's your number 3 pick?
I'm going to go with Keyshawn George. We've talked about him a lot.
Okay.
The next year's draft is pretty rough, so I don't think that is. And again, like we just talked about, who knows what the situation for the team is going to be in a year, whether that pick is going to really be high in the draft. George is a big wing, which obviously in the NBA today, probably the single most valuable thing you can have is a big wing player. And look, he's not perfect, but he's shooting over 40% from three. He's shown like he could be a big scoring wing. He's got some stuff to his game. It's going to be, he's a very interesting piece. And again, if you put that lead guy, let's say they get Darren Peterson, you have a lead ball handler with a wing and a big. That's the
Things
formula, right?
Fitting together.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jalen Williams, and Chet Holmgren. I'm not saying those guys are going to be those guys, to be clear, but that's
the archetypes.
That's the archetype of what you're looking for, is a lead ball handler, a scoring wing, and a big. So, and I think he has the best chance of filling, again, of the assets we're talking about, he's got the best chance of filling one of those roles of the guys they have available to him at the moment.
It is... I don't know that there's a player on the Wizards who would benefit more from having that lead ball handler like a Peterson or Durbanza on the team than Keyshawn George, because I love Keyshawn George. I love his game. I think he's definitely overtaxed in the current role that he's being asked to play. He's someone who's probably best attacking closeouts, kind of working off the second side rather than running, I don't know what he's at right now, but up to 20 pick and rolls a game maybe. A lot of turnovers. The finishing at the rim has come down a little bit. He's getting to the foul line a little less, taking a lot of mid-range shots. The process has been a little bit worse than it was early on in the season. That's just the realities of a young player, I think. But there's a lot still to like. He's someone who can guard up and down the lineup. He's someone who can play with the ball in his hands or without the ball in his hands, spaces the floor well. A lot to like. Someone who I think can fit in with a lot of different types of lineups and a lot of different types of players too, which is very helpful as you're trying to put pieces around him moving forward.
Yeah, no question. No question. And again, like when you're trying to compare them to the other assets the Clippers have, are the Clippers. The Clippers are on my brain today for other reasons. Part of the reason why he to me is the obvious pick is there's really not another person that you can, or another pick you can look at and say has a path to being a surefire starter especially at a valuable position. So you put all those things together, and to me, the first 3 picks in this were pretty clear in the order, in that order. That draft pick this year, Sarr, and then George, and then I really had a lot of trouble after that having a sense of where to.
This is where it gets interesting.
Yes.
I'm going to go with the 2027 Wizards first round pick. It is a totally, they don't owe it to anyone. There's no protections. It's a totally open pick for them. They don't have any swaps on this pick too. So as of right now, wherever it lands in the lottery is where they're going to have it. The read that I have right now about what next season will look like for the Wizards, they're going to have a lot of cap space this upcoming year. I don't think they're going to use it on trying to, fast track this rebuild. That's my read as of right now. That can change as the year goes on. I think they want to use the 2026-2027 season as a evaluation year. What is this core with Sarr, with George, with Trey Johnson, who I think we'll be talking about soon, with whoever they pick in this upcoming draft? What does that all look like together? I think in the optimistic case, things click really well and it's a play-in team. But I think it's still probably a lottery team, and with the new odds, who knows where that pick could end up.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's a rough draft by all accounts, so who knows what the high-end talent will be in it. But yes, it's fair, and I think the fact that you're doing that is an indictment on all of the current talent they have, for being honest.
Yeah. Yeah. Who's your next player? Or pick?
I think, again, and what I would say is also probably an indictment on the current roster, uh, I would probably say that the next thing I would take is the swap with the Suns this year.
Mm.
Uh, because if that um, if that pick winds up in the lottery, which I would still guess ultimately the Suns wind up in the lottery, um, it would give them, as you pointed out earlier, another chance to get a the franchise player we talked about. And while that might not be a very high chance, we saw the Mavs go up from 11-1 this year to get the pick, the number one pick, and the Hawks went from 10-1 the year before. So it certainly happened regularly in this era of the draft. And I would also say that, again, of the guys we're talking about on the roster, I just am not sure there's another guy I look at and say that guy's going to be a starter on a high level team. So I would rather take the swing on the chances of that pick going up. And I would also say, in a vacuum, that I'm going to check this right now. I still am not sold on the Suns being the seventh seed or the sixth seed in the Western Conference. Currently, as of Wednesday afternoon, sorry for doing this way, but I'm trying to look this up quick. According
Okay.
to our projection system, or BPI, the Suns are projected to finish eighth with 41 wins. However, they have played a very soft schedule. If they end up ninth or 10th, all of a sudden they could end up with, say, the 10th pick in the lottery. And if you have the 10th pick in the lottery, well, there's a chance that that
Who
becomes
knows?
the number one or two pick, right? So, again, in sort of a common refrain, I don't love the current talent. There's one guy I would debate taking. We'll see if you take him. But I'll take the swing on that pick and bet on, now Devin Booker's hurt. We'll see if the Suns start to go the other way after what's been a fantastic start for them. But they could just as easily start to slide the other way, have some injuries, slide down the standings, and then all of a sudden you're sitting there with a bite at, one of these top guys that they really need.
Yeah, yeah. I am going to go next with Trey Johnson, who I think is probably the player you were talking about.
It was not, actually.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I'm very interested to see where this goes. We haven't seen too much from Trey Johnson yet. He's been out for a little bit now with a hip injury, but you talked about it earlier. Size and shooting are worth betting on, and Trey is a big guard. He is a guard with a long wingspan, and he shoots the you-know-what out of the ball. I think also he is a person worth betting on. Everyone, I think, in the NBA is pretty hardworking, but he seems to be particularly single-minded in his craft, and that's perhaps to a fault when it comes to trying to live a real life, but the NBA seems to reward those kinds of guys, so I'm pretty bullish on what he can become. On the low end, maybe someone like a Malik Beasley type, and then on the high end, maybe we're talking about someone like Devin Booker if things really come to fruition for him.
Yeah, I'm pretty down on one position volume shooting guards. That's about as low value a position as we have in the league right now. Look, let's be honest. Like, Jeremiah Fears looks really good, and even Derek Queen, was at Maryland last year. He looks super interesting. Obviously, I would not have given up the trade that the Pelicans did to get him, but Trey Johnson's a talented player, but at the same time, I'm curious to see, if you're going to draft a 6'5" guy that his primary deal is he gets buckets, he better get a lot of buckets, and the path to that player being the kind of impact player we're talking about, again, I think him becoming Malik Beasley or Malik Monk or someone like that is a fair outcome to expect, which is a good NBA player. That's not a bust by any means. It's also not the kind of high upside swing that the Wizards really need. So that is why I didn't have him higher. The guy that I was thinking about taking and will take now is Bilal Coulibaly, for the same reason that I just talked about. Now, look, is there a world where he just never puts it together on offense and is a, you know, athletic defensive wing and kind of floats around the league because of that for a while and doesn't amount to star level stuff? Yeah, there's a very real chance of that, right? The ceiling is lower, or the floor is lower for him, probably. Um, he's still only 21 years old. He has had some injury issues the last year and a half. Um, if he can become a better shooter and scorer, like you mentioned his defense the other night, like he has the combination of athleticism and length that if it does click at some point, he could be a really impact difference making player. And I just think that ceiling at this point is higher than Trey's. And given where the Wizards are at, I'm betting on ceilings. So I'll bet on again, if I'm just picking one way or the other, I'll pick him in the hope that it comes together, because if it doesn't come together, well, that's fine. But I also don't I just don't, to me, it's more of a bet against Trey Johnson becoming Devin Booker or
Sure.
some guy like that. And this guy Bilal Coulibaly, with his skill set, has a chance to become the kind of piece they really need. So I'll take the swing on that and keep my fingers crossed that he makes the offensive developments that he's obviously going to need to become that kind of player.
I had Rob Mahoney on the podcast last week, and we were talking about what Bilal could be if the shot never comes around. Because right now, it still has not come around this year. He is shooting 30% on threes, on catch and shoot threes, and then 27.3% on wide open threes per NBA.com. So it is something that remains an issue for him. He looked, I don't know, yesterday against Philly was a weird game. He only took 5 shots. I asked Brian Keefe after the game if he was being tentative. Keefe said no. He was guarding Maxey. That's a tough assignment. More about the flow of the game. TBD, honestly. His handle still isn't great. There was a play yesterday where after a switch, he's got Drummond guarding him, and he couldn't beat Andre Drummond off the dribble. And that's a little bit troubling. There was a weird process to that play, too, where he kind of attacks Drummond from around the free throw line or a little bit outside that, and I was like, back up a little bit. Like, he's going to come out to a certain degree. You have, use your speed and kind of the differential there, but it has been a challenging season for him on offense. Still early, still kind of coming back from the injury, building his rhythm, but worth seeing what that offense looks like. But if the shot does not come around, what do you kind of see as what he would be moving forward? Because I've always said Herb Jones is kind of a guy who I've compared it to, a little bit shorter than Herb Jones, but Jones had a season where he shot pretty well for the ball, and it's been up and down since.
Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly is a high-end outcome, and if he can become Herb Jones on defense, then he'll probably end up ahead of Trey Johnson, regardless of whether the shot comes around. I'm a little skeptical he can be that good. But yeah, but again, like if you are even saying, well, this guy could be Herb Jones if his shot doesn't really come around, then like the ceiling is just really high.
That's fair.
If it comes together. So, and again, this is my picks have all been aligned the same way for a reason, right? It's like you're aiming for the highest possible outcome on the variance scale to get this team where it hopes to be. So I'll, hope that Coulibaly by the end of this year has a development path like, say, Alex Sarr did last year. He's still very young. So, but yeah, I think if the shot doesn't come around, it's probably just not really going to work. But, that's when you take a guy that toolsy and young at 7, that's the bet you're making, that you can develop him into that kind of player, and we'll see if the Wizards are able to.
I am so fascinated to see what potential extension conversations with Bilal look like after the season, because with a player who's still this much of an unknown and still much of a potential, are you paying him based on what he's done already? Are you paying him based on what he's going to do? How do you project what he's going to do? It's going to be a very difficult negotiation, I think, for the Wizards, and I'm very curious to see how they come out of it and how long Bilal wants to sign for in that process.
Yes, it'll be really it'll be really, really interesting to see where that lands. And that, it's one of a lot of decisions these guys have to make because, like you said, you're now, I mean, he was their first draft pick, right? And you're into the third year of this thing, so at some point you have to start showing signs of progress, both as an organization overall and as a guy like Bilal Coulibaly. And if he's in the same place he is right now in the spring, I suspect the negotiations will be pretty short. If he takes some strides, then I think it gets really interesting. So, for the Wizards' sake, hopefully it gets pretty interesting.
Yeah. Let's get to my last pick and the last pick of this draft. I'm going to take that 2028 first round pick. There are a lot of protections here that aren't intuitive to explain in an audio medium, but basically how I understand it, the Wizards have their own pick. They could potentially swap it from a group of not so great options. You're looking at the worst of Brooklyn's pick, Philly's pick, Phoenix's pick, or the worst of Milwaukee and Portland's pick. So if the Wizards are bad, they're probably just going to keep their pick, it looks like. I think there's a lot of different ways that the Wizards could look after entering that 2028 draft and what that pick could look like. One possibility, you land Darren Peterson, things start clicking in high gear, next thing you know, you're winning, in which case the picks that you could be swapping with could be very interesting. Or the rebuild is sputtering and, a front office that really needs to show progress turns and kind of makes a more aggressive deal to get someone from outside the team in a trade to be their first star. Or, and this is, I think, I don't know how likely this path is, or they've got such a long runway and so much inbuilt trust with owner team governor Ted Leonsis, that they get a chance to say, this first crack at the rebuild didn't really work out. We're going to try and start this all over again, in which case the 2028 first gets very interesting. So I think that there's some ways that 2028 first round pick could work out pretty high in the draft for the Wizards, but we'll see.
That is all true, and it again is an indictment on where the team sits, that you're taking a pick for 3 years from now as one of the 8 best assets they have.
I mean, it was that or Will Riley, who I like a lot but hasn't really played much this year, so I don't know.
Like I said, that's I mean, look, again, they traded Denny Avia for Bub Carrington and a future first, essentially, because they traded him for the pick that became Bub Carrington. Like, that's been a disappointment, right? Denny's become a star. Mm-hmm. They could really use Denny Avia right now. Like, if they had Denny Avia with these guys they have and they added another piece, they could really be cooking with gas next year. And I'm not saying that I'm not second guessing the trade. At the time, I was all for the trade. Thought it was great value for the Wizards to get for him. Didn't understand why the Blazers did it. He's shot up. Again, this goes back to the whole get as many bites at this as you can thing. So, you're not going to be perfect if you're doing this right. But at the same time, like, you got to start seeing some tangible signs of growth and improvement from these guys. And they've had a couple. Sarr's made real strides. George has made real strides. Those guys are wins, I would say. But you got to have more than 2. You got to start stacking some more. And it's what makes this season and this upcoming draft and where they sit next July 1st really fascinating. Because like you said, this will look a lot different if they have the 7th pick or the first pick. Or the second pick.
You look at they made
that's
6.
What makes this interesting.
They've made 6 first-round picks so far in the Winger Dawkins era. I think you say that 2 of them are hits pretty definitively in Sarr and Keyshawn. I would say 2 are pretty big question marks in Trey and Will, just because they're rookies and we've seen them for very little time so far.
You can't say anything about them yet.
Yeah, and then Bilal and Bub, they're still young. There's still a lot of runway still, but it's not looking ideal right now. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
It's hard. Is there anyone else on the roster that you considered to put in this top 8?
No.
I think that's where I land as well. If Cam Whitmore had a great start to the season, maybe I would have said him, but it's been really up and down for him. Haven't seen much from AJ Johnson. He's in the G League now, so yeah, okay. Perfect. Tim, where can people find your work?
At ESPN.com. I'm on the Hoop Collective every week with Brian Winters and Tim McMahon. You can check me out there on our podcast. But yeah, on ESPN's Airways, on .com, write about the league, trying to keep up with all the craziness that's going on. And yeah, that's the long and short of it.
Perfect.
Not hard to find me.
There we go. Thank you so much, Tim.
Thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much to Tim. Please make sure to check out his work. You can find me at the Washington Post, and you can follow me on most social medias at Varun Shankar. You can follow the show using the handles in the episode description. Please make sure to like, rate, review, share, and subscribe the show no matter where you watch or listen. Cannot tell you how helpful it is. Still working through the schedule for next week, but I'll probably have something. I'll talk to you guys soon.